For 12 years, I was an assistant, a silent fixture in the bustling corporate landscape. The vice president, Marcus Grant, the man I'd supported for almost a decade, delivered the news with a casual indifference that felt like a silken poison. I'd seen it coming for months. The sudden exclusion from meetings, the hushed conversations that ceased when I entered a room, the rise of Caleb, the new business school graduate, always eager with compliments and coffee for Marcus. "I understand," I replied, my voice steady despite the frantic pounding in my chest. "Is this effective immediately?" Marcus seemed relieved by my composure. He offered 2 weeks severance, and HR would facilitate my departure by day's end. "It's not personal, Allie," he added, a familiar refrain when people discard you without a second thought. "I see," I said, rising gracefully. "Then allow me to congratulate Caleb. He has potential, and you need people who think big and agree with everything you suggest." As I extended my hand, Marcus hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, but a slight tremor betrayed a hint of unease. Perhaps deep down he knew the injustice of it, but he proceeded anyway. Leaving his office, I walked past the cubicles already buzzing with whispers. My desk, as always, was impeccably organized. I pulled out a cardboard box from beneath, a contingency I'd always kept. You don't survive 12 years in the corporate world without preparing for abrupt endings. As I packed, a black unassuming USB drive in the far left drawer caught my eye. This drive held the company's entire internal tracking and inventory system, a project I'd meticulously built and maintained for 6 years, well beyond my job description. Every fix, every patch, every update resided on that drive. I hadn't touched it since Kayla began shadowing me, and now I tucked it into my bag. Jenna from compliance, her face pale and confused, approached my cubicle. "Is it true?" I nodded. "Apparently, assistants don't get promoted." Jenna looked horrified. "But you do everything. Half this department would collapse without you." I offered a genuine smile. "Well, I suppose we're about to find out." Walking towards the exit, a familiar ache tightened my throat. I wasn't just leaving a job, I was leaving a part of myself. 12 years of unwavering loyalty, of preemptively solving problems and cleaning up unseen messes. No performance review, no thank you, just a handshake and the door. In the unusually bright Friday afternoon parking lot, I sat in my car, letting the silence envelop me. My phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "Lunch this weekend. You've been MIA lately." I hadn't told anyone yet. I wanted to process it alone first. I envisioned Caleb settling into my old chair, fearing up the system I had painstakingly created. He had no idea of its custom code, its delicate balance without proper maintenance, or that the only person who truly understood it had just walked out with a quiet smile and a black USB drive. That night, I sipped wine, opened my laptop, and accessed a private backup account I discreetly established years ago. The system was stable for now, but even a minor alteration in the wrong module would make tomorrow interesting. The next morning, driven by habit, I woke early. The sun filtered through my curtains as I drank coffee and opened my laptop. No alarms, no urgent emails, no daunting to-do list. For the first time in over a decade, my day was entirely my own. Yet a strange tension buzzed within me, like the charged air before a storm. At 9:13 a.m., it began. My phone erupted with messages. "Jenna, Allie, something's wrong with the system. Files are missing." Ben from IT. "Hey, weird question. Do you remember how the inventory software logs updates? We can't access anything after Q3. Tomorrow from accounting. Emergency. Are you available to talk, please?" I leaned back, my heart beating calmly. I wasn't gloating, nor was I angry anymore. It felt inevitable, like watching dominoes fall that someone else had meticulously arranged. The custom system I had built functioned flawlessly for those who understood its intricacies. There was a quarterly update and monthly manual data reconciliations that had to be triggered, or the cascading backups would lock. All of this was detailed in a guide Caleb had proudly declared he didn't need to read. My phone vibrated more insistently. Jenna. Marcus is losing it. System crashed. They can't process orders. Help. Seconds later, an unknown number messaged, Ally, this is Marcus. Call me immediately. I smiled faintly, setting my phone down. It buzzed relentlessly, desperately, until it finally fell silent. At 9:57 a.m., the corporate website went offline. By 10:15 a.m., Marcus's direct line was overwhelmed with calls from vendors, clients, and other departments unable to access crucial inventory data. It was utter chaos, and I wasn't even there. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply left. The house of cards Marcus had built on arrogance and favoritism crumbled the moment it lost the one thing he had underestimated: knowledge. At 11:06 a.m., nursing a second coffee at my favorite cafe, I finally opened Marcus's email. Subject: Urgent, request for assistance. The message expressed regret for the abrupt conversation and humbly requested any documentation or guidance on the systems I had managed, offering compensation for my time. I reread it, savoring the irony. 12 years, and it took only 24 hours for them to realize the value they discarded. I glanced at the clock. 11:15 a.m. Around this time, corporate would be holding an emergency crisis meeting, the kind I would have normally organized, prepared notes for, and calmly led through solutions. Instead, they had Caleb, who, according to Jenna's texts, was blaming everything on the servers, IT, and even the outdated system, never admitting he hadn't bothered to learn how it truly worked. I closed Marcus's email without replying. Some lessons are best learned the hard way. By noon, LinkedIn was buzzing with rumors of layoffs and client delays. Eversource Logistics, the company's biggest client, had reportedly canceled a meeting due to technical instability. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from their struggle, but because the truth always surfaces. The problem wasn't me. It was their culture, rewarding flash over substance, loudness over loyalty. I had been the steady foundation they only noticed once it was gone. Now, they were sinking in quicksand with every desperate email and frantic call. My phone buzzed again. Jenna. Marcus just got called into an emergency session with the CEO. People are furious. They're asking why you weren't promoted instead of Caleb. I smiled faintly, picturing Marcus sweating in his expensive suit, attempting to justify his reckless decision. The river was rushing, pulling everything loose downstream. But, as my father used to say, and I was finally understanding, the rocks remained steady. And I was steady. Steadier than ever before. By Monday morning, the damage was irreversible. The client portal was down, internal systems were riddled with errors, deliveries were delayed, orders duplicated or rerouted incorrectly. Vendors were furious, clients panicked, and Marcus Grant was visibly unraveling. Jenna kept me updated with dispatches from the front lines. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. CEO tore into him in front of everyone. Caleb was literally sweating through his shirt. I hadn't replied to Marcus's messages, not for revenge, but for respect. 12 years of loyalty, of working late, fixing unseen problems, training interns, mediating conflicts, and covering for others' mistakes. And yet, I was told assistants don't get promoted. Now, all those invisible contributions had become glaringly visible. At 11:30 a.m., an unrecognized number called. Something urged me to answer. Hello, Allie Peterson? A calm professional voice asked. Yes, this is Angela Browning, executive assistant to Darren Shaw, CEO of Westbridge Logistics. Westbridge, a major former competitor. Mr. Shaw would like to meet with you this week. Your name came highly recommended. My breath caught. May I ask who recommended me? A pause. I believe it was one of your former clients at Eversource. They said, and I quote, "She's the only reason we renewed with them last year." I exhaled slowly. I'd be happy to speak with Mr. Shaw. Wonderful, Angela replied. We'll set something up for Thursday morning. After the call, I stared at my phone. My hands weren't shaking, my chest wasn't tight. This wasn't panic, it was possibility. That evening, I met my sister, Elena, an HR director at a healthcare firm, at a small Italian restaurant we used to frequent as children. She listened as I recounted everything: the firing, the crash, the fallout. Then I showed her Marcus's cold, detached termination email. Elena's eyes darkened. You know you could sue, she said, cutting her pasta with precision. Not just for wrongful termination, but for discrimination. 12 years without promotion. That's not a coincidence. I don't want to sue, I said softly. I want to build something better. She raised an eyebrow. Meaning, I want to work somewhere that values what I do, where they see me as more than a background character. Somewhere I can grow, lead, be seen. She nodded, then offered a small smile. You always did like fixing broken systems. Only when they're worth fixing, I replied, and we clinked wine glasses. The next day, an email arrived from Paula Hensley, a senior director I had supported years ago. Allie, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have said something when I heard what Marcus did, but I was afraid of making waves, of putting my job at risk. It wasn't right. Everyone here knows it. You were the glue. Whatever you do next, they'll be lucky to have you. And if there's ever anything I can do, say the word. It made me pause, as I had spent years believing I was invisible. But invisibility doesn't mean absence. People feel your absence, especially when the system breaks where you once held it together. That afternoon, I updated my resume, which hadn't been touched in years. I toggled my LinkedIn open to work setting to public. Within an hour, I had 3 messages. By the next morning, 10. The world was opening up in a way it never had, not because I shouted or burned bridges, but because I quietly walked away from what didn't value me, allowing my work to speak for itself. And it was speaking loudly. The Westbridge Logistics Building was everything Summit Edge wasn't: modern, open, inviting. Reception greeted me by name and offered espresso. The air smelled of citrus and ambition, not desperation. At exactly 9 a.m., Angela, with a warm smile, escorted me to the top floor. Mr. Shaw's looking forward to meeting you, she said, then added quietly, everyone here is talking about what happened at Summit Edge. You made quite an impression. I nodded politely, my heart pounding. Not from nervousness, but from the surreal feeling of being a sought-after candidate after a decade of being just an assistant. Darren Shaw, tall in his early 50s, confident yet not arrogant, stood as I entered his office. Allie, he said warmly, extending his hand. We finally meet. Thank you for the invitation, I replied. We settled into leather chairs, sunlight streaming in. He wasted no time. I've spoken with several people, vendors, clients, even some of your old teammates. They all said the same thing. You were the backbone of that department. I remained silent. They also said you were overlooked, passed over, undervalued. I simply met his gaze. Darren continued. Our industry doesn't often reward quiet excellence. It chases the loudest voice in the room. But I'm more interested in the one who keeps the machine running when no one's looking. Something in my chest, tight for years, finally loosened. He slid a folder across the table. I'd like you to review this. Inside was an offer letter. Director of Operations, Regional Supply Chain Division. Full benefits, a competitive salary 35% higher than my previous one, and most surprisingly, a personal budget to build a support team from the ground up. I want someone who understands the ground level and the strategy, and I want you to hire who you trust. Start fresh. We're expanding into 3 new markets, and I need stability at the core. I looked up, stunned. You're offering me a division? I'm offering you autonomy. I don't micromanage. You've already proven you can manage circles around most so-called leaders in this field. the voice that Summit Edge had cultivated, whispering, "You're just an assistant," tried to surface, but I silenced it. I was never just anything. "I'd like a few days to consider," I said. "Take your time," Darren replied. "But we'd like you to start as soon as possible." As Angela escorted me out, she grinned. "We've never seen Darren this excited about a hire. You've shaken up more than one executive office this week." Outside on the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. "Marcus was just escorted out of the building. Effective immediately, no warning." I reread it twice. Then another message arrived. "Tamara from accounting. Dan is stepping in temporarily, but there's talk of a full audit. They're blaming Marcus for the system crash and the client fallout. Everyone's nervous." So it had finally happened. Not just a ripple, but a full break. And suddenly, I wasn't angry, not even satisfied. I was ready. That evening, I sat at my dining table with the Westbridge offer letter. I thought about every late night at Summit Edge, every ignored suggestion, every private praise that was publicly hidden. And then I thought about the team I used to work with, people like Jenna and Tamara, still trapped under leaders who never truly saw them. Perhaps now, I could be the leader I had always needed. I signed the offer. Then I picked up my phone and began writing a message, not to Marcus or Caleb, but to Jenna. "Hey, I accepted a new role today, a real one. They're giving me a budget to build a team from scratch. If you're interested, I want you with me." 10 seconds later, Jenna replied, "Name the time and place, I'm in." I smiled and sent 2 more messages. Then I opened my laptop and pulled out the list I'd quietly kept for years, the names of people who deserved better. 3 weeks after signing with Westbridge, I walked into my new office, a corner suite overlooking the skyline. The nameplate on the door read, "Allie Peterson, Director of Regional Operations." I stood there, letting it sink in. I hadn't been handed this role, I had earned it. And now I had something rarer than a promotion: trust. A new company, a blank canvas, a team to build from the ground up, and I already knew who I wanted. Jenna was my first hire, resigning from Summit Edge the day I texted her, without even giving 2 weeks' notice. Tamara followed, then another from IT. Word spread quickly in our industry. I didn't poach anyone, I simply offered something better: respect, a voice, a seat at the table. I held interviews, but half the candidates came from people I had worked with before, people who had seen my quiet efficiency and lack of ego. By month's end, I had a full team, sharp, loyal, experienced professionals who had been overlooked for too long. At our first team meeting, I stood in a bright conference room, a marker in one hand, a sense of purpose in the other. "I'm not here to micromanage you," I said. "You know how to do your jobs. You've done them for years without credit. What I want to know is, what tools do you need to do them better?" That question sparked 2 hours of honest, passionate conversation. We discussed broken workflows, outdated software, communication gaps, and the burnout from propping up departments that never thanked us. We didn't just build a new structure. We dismantled the old one brick by brick and built something better. Meanwhile, Summit Edge was hemorrhaging. The week after I started at Westbridge, Eversource Logistics, one of their major clients, quietly pulled out. Jenna had coffee with an old friend who still worked there, and the gossip flowed. Marcus had been let go, Caleb reassigned to a meaningless project, and the CEO was furious. The board had launched an internal investigation. Someone had anonymously sent copies of internal emails to HR, including mine, Marcus's cold dismissal, his refusal to promote long-term employees, and his cover-ups when systems failed. I never found out who sent them, but I had my suspicions. Late one afternoon, I received a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. "Allie," a hesitant voice asked. "It's Dan from Summit. We hadn't spoken since I cleared my desk." "I'm sure you've heard about everything," he said awkwardly. "We've taken some hits, big ones." I didn't reply. "I just wanted to ask, off the record, did you send those emails to the board?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "No, Dan, but I'm glad someone did." He sighed. "We were wrong about you about a lot of things. We'd like to make things right. I glanced around my office, at the plants by the window, at Jenna's framed message on my desk. Real leaders don't need a title, but now you finally have both. Thanks, Dan, I said gently. But I already am. Then I hung up. That Friday, our team gathered at a rooftop bar to celebrate our first month. We laughed, shared stories, and talked about things that truly mattered. Goals, dreams, and how seen everyone felt for the first time in years. Summit Edge used to be my plan for the next 10 years, Jenna said, sipping her wine. Now I can't believe I stayed as long as I did. You stayed because you believed in the work, I replied. We all did. And now? Tamara asked. Now, I said. We do it on our own terms. The sun dipped below the city skyline, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to prove myself. I didn't feel small or replaceable. I felt exactly who I had always been, capable, steady, and finally in a place that recognized my worth. 3 months into my new role, Westbridge's quarterly report went public. A 32% increase in regional efficiency, 2 major accounts acquired from competitors, and employee retention at an all-time high. At the bottom of the internal announcement was a note from CEO Darren Shaw. Exceptional leadership begins with those who understand the work. Ally Peterson and her team exemplify what happens when you recognize talent and trust it. This is just the beginning. I stared at that sentence for a long time. After 12 years of being background noise, I had finally become part of the conversation. 2 days later, a news alert popped up on my phone. Summit Edge to be acquired by GlobalX Freight Systems following client loss, internal turmoil. The article was clinical, like all corporate obituaries, filled with quotes about strategic partnerships. But the truth was clear. They had lost 5 major accounts in 6 months. 3 had followed me to Westbridge, and the rest had quietly exited after realizing no one understood the systems, processes, or people anymore. Caleb had left a month ago, and Dan had retired early. I felt no triumph, no cruel satisfaction. Instead, I felt confirmed. Everything I had endured, every quiet frustration, every overlooked contribution. It had all meant something. Not because I burned it all down, but because I chose to build something better. That evening, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year, Barbara Kent, former HR coordinator at Summit Edge. She had left shortly after I did, rumored to be thriving at a startup. Her message was simple. Saw the news. They finally saw what happens when you fire the foundation. Proud of you. I typed a reply, then paused, erased it. Sometimes, silence is the most honest response. 3 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a regional leadership conference on quiet leadership and lasting impact. I almost declined, but then I remembered all the meetings at Summit Edge where less qualified people talked over me, took credit, and rose while I remained invisible. I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. So I said yes. I stood on stage in front of 200 executives and told my story. Not of revenge or sabotage, but of misjudgment, perseverance, and the power of doing things the right way. I spoke of being called just an assistant, of the system crash, the calls, the silence, and then the rebuilding. Most importantly, I talked about leading with empathy, quiet strength, and unwavering integrity. Afterward, 3 young women approached me, junior managers from different companies. One said, I didn't think people like us could make it to the top without compromising who we are. I smiled. We can and we will, but you have to know your value, even when they don't. On the 1-year anniversary of my termination, Jenna and Tamara surprised me at the office with a cake that read, "To the woman they couldn't replace." I truly laughed as the whole team gathered. Jason had just accepted a director role in our southern region. Tamara was leading a mentorship program, and Jenna had been nominated for an industry award. Every one of them was growing, thriving, seen. We raised our glasses. To new beginnings, I said. And to Allie, Jenna added, for proving you don't have to burn bridges to move forward. Sometimes you just need to cross a better one. We clinked cups, and I looked around at the faces that once sat quietly in other people's meetings, now leading their own. We weren't the loudest or the flashiest, but we were the ones who held the line. The rocks in the river, the steady ones, and in the end, we were the ones who won.